They didn't ask my name. They didn't ask for my passport. They just pointed at my veil and said, "Take that off, now." It was at the airport, right in the middle of Europe, surrounded by cameras, lights, and cold stares, that they tore off my hijab as if they were stripping away my dignity. In that moment, I understood. The world tolerates everything, except a woman who chooses to cover herself out of faith. And there, voiceless, with my eyes fixed on the ground, began the most painful and most powerful part of my story. My name is Layla, I'm 26 years old, and I'm French. But what brought me here wasn't a trip, it was a search. A silent search for something I couldn't even name at first. Until I found Islam, or rather, until Islam found me. Before continuing this testimony, write in the comments where you're watching this video from. And if this topic has ever touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now, because what you're about to hear isn't just my story. It might be the beginning of yours too. The call came while I was having coffee. Your father didn't make it. 3 words, no warning, no time to breathe. The cup stayed in my hand for a few seconds, but it was the ground that gave out first. In that instant, the world kept turning outside, but inside me, everything stopped. There wasn't a big external collapse. I didn't cry in public. I didn't lock myself at home. I did what everyone expected. I was strong. I went back to college the next week, replied to messages with emojis, kept up appearances, but inside, something had died with him, and no one noticed. I began to ask myself what really existed after pain, and why, if God existed, he would allow things like this to happen. It was in that silence that I noticed Salim, a quiet classmate. He never tried to draw attention, but when everyone else seemed adrift, he remained steady, serene. There was something in the way he spoke, walked, even in the way he stayed silent. And when I saw him unroll his prayer rug to pray between classes, in the corner of the library, I felt something unexplainable. As if that scene was telling me that there was still something sacred in the world, even if I didn't understand it. Little by little, I was drawn in by a curiosity that wasn't rational. It was like thirst. I wanted to know what made someone have that kind of peace. Islam, until then, was just a distorted label I had learned to fear. But in practice, right there in front of me, it felt pure, human, real. One day, I got the courage to ask, "Have you always believed in all this?" He smiled and replied, "No. But when you find the truth, it changes you, with or without your permission." That sentence haunted me for days. And the following night, hidden from everyone, I typed, "What is true Islam?" I didn't find extremism. I found mercy. I didn't see imposition. I saw surrender. That was the beginning of something I could never fully explain in words. It was as if, after losing everything, I had finally found something no one could take from me. If you've ever lived through the kind of pain that makes you question everything, know this. The right question can be the start of a new destiny. And sometimes, it's in the loss that God finally finds room to answer. That night, after hours of secretly reading about Islam, something inside me started to shift. I still didn't understand exactly what I was searching for. I just knew I couldn't go back to what I was before. The answers I found didn't come with formulas or magical promises. They came with truths that left me restless, and at the same time, at peace. But reading websites was one thing. Opening the Quran for the first time was something entirely different. I remember it like it was now. We were in the college library, Salim and I. He noticed that my gaze was no longer one of casual curiosity. Then he pulled a French copy out of his backpack, placed it in front of me, and simply said, "You don't have to understand everything, but read with an open heart." My hands were trembling. It was just a book, I kept telling myself. But at the same time, I knew it wasn't just a book. It felt like I was about to cross an invisible threshold. When I opened it and started reading the first verses of Surah Al-Fatiha, I felt a different kind of silence around me. It wasn't an absence of sound. It was the presence of something I had never felt before. Each word felt like it had been written for someone like me, lost, hungry for meaning, silently broken. And what struck me most was the tone. There was no hatred, no force. There was a God who spoke with kindness, who saw the pain and called you back with promises of mercy. I closed the book and said nothing. I just let the tears fall, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in a long while, I felt that someone, finally understood me. In the days that followed, I began to carry that Quran with me, hidden between my notebooks. I read it during breaks, on the train, before going to sleep. And the more I read, the less fear I felt. The world outside remained the same, noisy, rushed, superficial. But inside me, something was being rebuilt with every page. That was the first time I touched the Quran, but the truth is, it was the Quran that touched me first. After that night when I typed, "What is true Islam?" something changed. Not from the outside in, but from the inside out. The questions that once suffocated me began to lead to answers that didn't come from logic, but from something deeper. I still didn't know what to call it. I just knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Salim noticed. At first, he respected my distance. But when my eyes started to seek more than arguments, he understood it was time to show me what no YouTube video or academic text could ever explain. One day, in the library, he pulled a French copy of the Quran from his backpack. He placed it on the table and said, "You don't need to understand everything right now, but if you're ready, read with your heart." My hands hesitated. It wasn't fear, it was reverence. I came from a world where sacred books were shelf objects, read out of obligation or tradition. But that book, it felt alive. When I opened to the first pages and read Surah Al-Fatiha, something went through me. There was no religious sermon, no threats. There was supplication. There was mercy. There was a plea that felt like it came from my own soul. Guide us to the straight path. I closed the book and sat in silence. On the outside, I was still the same. But on the inside, something was being prepared. For the first time, I felt that God wasn't accusing me. He was waiting for me. In the following days, I started carrying that Quran hidden between my notebooks. I read it during breaks, on the train, before bed. Every page felt like someone was telling me secrets the world had always tried to silence. Yes, there were passages that confronted me. But even the hardest ones came with a wisdom that disarmed me. And then, on an ordinary night, I found myself crying again. But not from pain, this time from relief. Because after so many years searching for meaning, that book didn't give me all the answers. It led me straight to the source. There was no crowd, no announcement, no celebration. My conversion didn't happen in front of cameras or in support groups. It happened in the silence of my room, with my face on the pillow and my heart on fire, when I whispered the words that would change everything. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I said it quietly, but the spiritual world heard it loud and clear. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother. Not the few friends I had left. It was as if I had found a jewel so precious that, by instinct, I wanted to hide it. Not out of shame, but for protection. Out of fear that rejection would come before I had the strength to face it. In the days that followed, I began to change in silence. Prayer, which had once been a distant concept, became my anchor. With every sujood, I felt I was leaving a piece of pain on the ground and receiving a fragment of peace in return. I cried, but it was a clean cry. The cry of someone who had finally found home. I started fasting during Ramadan, even though no one knew. I carried dates in my bag. I learned to say Bismillah before eating and to make wudu in the college bathroom, afraid of being seen. Everything was new, awkward, secret. But everything was real. The biggest challenge came with the hijab. It wasn't about the fabric itself. It was about what it represented. A silent scream of who I had become. And for weeks I only wore it at home. Then on the way, then on the train. Until one day, I walked into class wearing it for the first time. Silence. Stares. A classmate muttered, "You became one of those?" But no one knew what that veil was hiding. A restored soul. An invisible covenant. A choice that came from pain, but bloomed in truth. I didn't need a crowd to validate my faith. It was enough to know that the one who created me was watching, and he approved. If you're in that silent stage of searching, afraid to speak, afraid to change, know this: Allah hears even what you don't say. And sometimes, the truest new beginnings don't start with a shout, but with a simple whisper in the dark. It wasn't on a special day. It wasn't a holiday, not even a Friday. But for me, that moment felt like a turning point. I was standing in front of the mirror, hands trembling, with the hijab carefully folded on my lap. That simple piece of cloth now carried the weight of everything I believed in. I put it on, adjusted it, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. On the street, I felt the stares before even reaching the subway. Some were curious, others accusatory. But the hardest part wasn't the strangers. It was the familiar faces. A classmate, someone I had once shared secrets and laughs with, stopped in front of me and said loudly, "So, you're a Muslim now? Lost your mind?" Some laughed, others looked away. And me? I stood still. Inside, my heart was racing, but on the outside, I simply nodded. I didn't need to explain. Those who have never tasted faith will never understand the cost of standing firm. That same day, a professor pulled me aside. She said with a tone of concern that I should reconsider my choices, that this path could close doors for me, isolate me, set me back professionally. I listened, I thanked her, and I walked away even more certain, because what no one could see was what the hijab truly meant to me. It wasn't submission, it was liberation. It wasn't a symbol of fear, it was a daily reminder of courage. I wasn't wearing it because I was forced to. I was wearing it because I had finally chosen whom I belonged to, and it was no longer the gaze of others. With time, I learned to walk with my head held high. I learned that resistance doesn't have to be shouted. It can be carried on the body. That firmness doesn't need speeches. It needs consistency. And that the real scandal isn't to cover oneself. It's to live without purpose. If someone told you that wearing the veil is oppression, maybe they've never known what it's like to dress in faith, with each layer covering a part of your story, your struggle, your identity. And if today you're at that same point, determined but afraid of judgment, remember, the world's eyes are fleeting, but Allah's gaze never wavers. Don't be afraid to be different. Be afraid of being like everyone else, when God has called you to be His. It was my first trip after converting. I chose Istanbul, not just for the city's beauty, but because I wanted to see with my own eyes a place where the sound of the adhan echoed without apology, where women like me weren't seen as oddities, but as a living part of the faith, and it was everything I dreamed of. I walked through the blue mosque with a light heart. I made dua by the Bosphorus as the sky turned orange. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. That being Muslim wasn't a social burden, it was rest for the soul, but every piece seems to be tested before it is sealed. On the way back, still smiling from the memories, I arrived at the airport with my suitcase and my hijab neatly in place. I showed my French passport. The officer looked at me, then at the document and said, "Inspection room, now." There was no explanation, no kindness, just pointing fingers, hard stares, and the silence of those who think they are serving justice. They put me in a cold room under bright white light. 3 officers, one of them a man. I asked calmly, "If it's necessary to remove my veil, please let it be done by a woman. It's part of my faith." They laughed. One of the agents looked at the other and said with contempt, "Oh, one of the fanatics." I insisted. I remained respectful, but the reply was short and sharp. "Remove the hijab now, or you'll be treated as if you're hiding something." My body went cold. My heart raced. It felt like everything I had built, every prayer, every step of courage, was being forcibly stripped away by people who didn't even know my name. With trembling hands, I reached for the scarf. It wasn't just fabric. It was my invisible flag, my identity, my obedience. And they were asking me to take it off in front of eyes that had no respect for it. It was there, in that room, that I understood. The struggle of a Muslim woman begins where the world tries to silence her. If you think living your faith is easy, wait until you're tested in public. But even when they forced me to lower the veil, they couldn't dim the light it had ignited inside me. And what happened next was even more humiliating, but also more revealing. The door closed with a dry snap. I stood there back against the cold wall, eyes fixed on the floor. Across the table, a man flipped through my passport as if looking for some fault. Beside him, a female security officer, no Islamic dress, no empathy, watched me like I was a problem. Once again, I asked firmly, "Please, if it's necessary, let it be a woman. I only ask that you respect my faith." The silence lasted seconds, but it weighed like a sentence, until he stood up, pushed the chair back, and said with a firm, cold, rehearsed voice, "You're going to take that off now. Here, or you'll be considered a security threat." There was no debate, no appeal, no voice for me in that place. My hands slowly reached for the veil. Every inch of fabric I unwrapped felt like a layer of my soul being torn away. I wanted to disappear, to scream, to hide, but all I could do was pray with my eyes. "Oh Allah, you see, you know." And if this is a test, let me pass it with dignity. When the hijab fell onto my shoulders, the silence became even more cruel. I felt exposed, not physically, but spiritually, as if my faith was being trampled on the floor of that room. The officer didn't even say thank you. He just looked, nodded, and walked away. The woman handed me back my passport as if she were doing me a favor. No one apologized. No one noticed the tears I swallowed to avoid appearing weak. I left that room more slowly than I entered. Not out of fear, but because something had broken. Not my faith, but my illusion that the world would respect my choice. The pain wasn't just in the act. It was in the coldness, the contempt, the way they completely ignored what it all meant to me. To them, it was just a scarf. To me, it was my obedience to God. And there, in that humiliation without an audience, something new was born. A firmness that no longer depends on a favorable environment. A conviction that doesn't waver under threats. If they take my veil 1,000 times, I'll put it back on 1,001. Because it doesn't start on the head. It starts in the heart. And no one has the right to remove what was placed by faith. I walked out of that room with the hijab in my hands and my heart in pieces. No one noticed. No one saw. The hallways were still full of voices, flight announcements, and groups of tourists laughing loudly. But inside me, the silence was screaming. I didn't want to face more stares. I found a quiet corner in the waiting area and sat down, hands in my lap, eyes fixed on nothing. And for a moment, I felt like I had returned to square one. As if everything I had achieved, every step of courage, every secret prayer, every verse that lifted me up, had been ripped away with brutality. But it was in that corner, ignored by the world, that something different happened. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and spoke to the one who never needed a passport to reach me. Ya Allah, they took off my veil, but not my faith. I felt humiliated, but you saw me. And if this was a test, give me strength to love you even more after it, I cried. Not in despair, but in reverence. Because even there, on that cold floor, I felt the warmest presence a person can feel. That of a Lord who never turns his face away. I picked up the hijab, folded it slowly, and when no one was looking, I covered my head again. Not because I was forced, but because I chose to. It was my act of resistance, my silent scream, my renewed covenant. While the world saw a girl sitting alone in an airport, invisible among the passengers, the heavens saw a servant being rebuilt. That's when I understood something no lecture could ever teach me. The greatest battlefield of faith isn't in debates or in books. It's in the hallways of real life, when you're tested without warning. When no one applauds you. When you obey, even while bleeding inside. If one day you feel belittled, ignored, or shamed because of your faith, remember, the reward isn't in people's hands. It's with the one who saw you when no one else did. And sometimes, the most sacred tears are the ones no one ever witnessed. Coming home after that trip felt strange. I carried a suitcase in my hands and a weight in my chest that no one could see. Everything looked the same. My bed, the pictures on the wall, the smell of breakfast. But me? I was no longer the same. I spent days in silence. I prayed when she wasn't around. I closed the door softly, placed the prayer rug behind the bed, and made my supplications in a whisper. Almost like someone afraid of being caught doing something forbidden. It wasn't shame. It was protection. I still didn't know if my mother would understand. I didn't know if she would see faith or betrayal. But that day came. I had just finished Maghrib when the door opened. I had forgotten to lock it. She stopped at the entrance, motionless, stared at me without saying a word. My forehead was still touching the ground. My heart raced. When I stood up, her eyes were full. It took a few seconds before she said, "You look at peace. I've never seen you like this." I sat on the rug, still unsure of what to say. But she continued, "I don't understand everything. It still scares me a little. But I can't deny what I saw. You're different. You're more whole." That night, we talked like we hadn't in years. She didn't ask about rules, about doctrine, about what I could or couldn't do now. She just wanted to understand what had happened to me. And I told her, not everything, but enough for her to know this wasn't a phase. It was a transformation. She listened. Sometimes she frowned. Sometimes she smiled softly. And when I finished, she simply said, "I'm still trying to accept it. But if this made you come back to life, then I respect it." I never imagined that the first acceptance would come from her, not with a celebration, not with a speech, but with a look that said, I still don't understand, but I love you. If you're afraid of being rejected by someone you love, breathe. Understanding doesn't always come quickly. But when the transformation is real, it speaks before you do. And sometimes, the strongest argument of faith is the peace it leaves on your face. After everything I lived, the silent questions, the judgmental stares, the humiliation at the airport, my mother's shock, I realized something that changed everything. The hijab can be stripped away, but the faith that placed it there can't be taken by human hands. They think they intimidated me, that they silenced me, that exposing my face to strangers would make me less firm, less Muslim, less resolute. What they don't know is that the veil on the head is only a reflection of the veil on the heart. And that one, no one has the right to touch. It wasn't easy to get here. It wasn't fast. But today, I know exactly who I am. And more than that, I know whom I belong to. Society can try to liberate me by force. They can call me oppressed, extreme, brainwashed. But I know what I found when I prostrated for the first time. I know what I felt when I read the Quran. And I know the kind of light that started to burn inside me from that day on. A light that doesn't depend on approval, that doesn't need an audience, and that no border authority can extinguish. Yes, they will keep trying. Maybe they'll glare at me in the supermarket. Maybe I'll lose professional opportunities. Maybe some doors will close. But honestly, better to lose doors than lose the key that connects me to Allah. Because the real loss is living to please everyone and ending up displeasing the one who knows me completely. The one who saw my tears in that airport room. The one who held me when everyone pointed fingers. The one who carried my faith when I no longer had strength in my hands. Today, I walk in peace, with or without a veil, with or without support. Because my commitment is not to the world, it's to the one who owns it. If one day you go through what I went through, and they try to break you by force, remember, those who are born again don't bow to anyone but God. And if they take off your veil, may they find a fortress underneath it, because true faith is not visible, it is unshakable. If you've listened to all of this up to now, know that it wasn't by chance. Maybe you haven't lived exactly what I lived, but if any part of this story echoed inside you, if you've ever been afraid to show who you've become, if you've ever hidden out of love for your faith, if you've ever cried trying to obey God in a world that mocks it, then, in some way, this is your story too. Today, I no longer need to shout to be heard. Because the one who truly hears me is not out there. He is above all. And the one who sustains me isn't in systems, public opinion, or social acceptance. He's in the silence of every prayer, in the strength that comes every time I prostrate, and in the peace I found when I stopped trying to please everyone and chose to please only one. I'm not perfect. I still stumble, still stay silent when I should speak, still battle insecurities no one sees. But something in me has changed forever. I will never again apologize for having faith. And if you're at the beginning of this journey, if you're still hiding your change, if you still pray in the dark for fear of judgment, hold on tight, because there are more people like you than you think. And there is a God who sees you when no one else sees, who honors you in secret, who strengthens your soul when the world tries to break your exterior. If this story touched your heart in any way, leave a comment saying which country you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now, not to support me, but so that more stories like this can reach those who need to hear them at the exact moment they're about to give up. Because sometimes, all it takes is one testimony to reignite someone's faith. And if what I went through can serve that purpose, then every pain was worth it. May Allah guide you, protect you, and keep you steadfast. Because the world may try to stop you, but when it's God who starts something inside you, no one can stand in the way.